Interpersonal communication is the verbal and nonverbal interaction between two, or sometimes more than two, interdependent people. This is the working definition Joseph DeVito uses in the discussion of this topic in the Interpersonal Communication book. It can be challenging to understand others' verbal messages and to learn to send well-composed verbal messages to others. It becomes a greater challenge when we attempt to interpret the world of nonverbal interpersonal communication. Let's see if we can bring to light important guidelines to successful nonverbal communication. We should look at the nonverbal messages we attempt to decode and look at nonverbal messages we are sending to others. The choices we make about each area will dramatically affect our present and future relationships. Before we look at guidelines, we should spend a minute talking about nonverbal messages in general. Nonverbal messages can be a facial movement, a gesture, a body movement like leaning in to listen, a touch, eye movement, or a passive nonverbal, meaning not sending a nonverbal message when one is expected. Nonverbal messages can complement your verbal, substitute for a verbal message, or a nonverbal can actually be the opposite of what's being said. It can definitely be challenging to interpret nonverbal messages. We should start with the nonverbal messages we are attempting to decode. I want to share 3 guidelines to help you to decode the nonverbal messages that others send to you. The first guideline to decoding nonverbal messages is to be tentative. So, you have noticed in the middle of a conversation that your partner in the conversation is displaying some type of nonverbal action. It could be any of the things that we just mentioned or something else. To be tentative means that just because you are aware of something, you don't have to immediately be judgmental about that nonverbal message. A good practice is to develop a hypothesis about what you think it means and then gradually check that out by asking questions instead of assuming. The second guideline to help you decoding nonverbal messages is to consider cultural context. We are aware of the fact that people in or from other countries or nationalities do have different nonverbal signals they might send. But we sometimes forget that everyone has a somewhat different cultural background or context that they're from. For example, some families cry when they experience the loss of a loved one. Some wail, some are very stoic, and others might tend to laugh. Attempt to think about what this confusing nonverbal message might mean from different backgrounds, different cultures, families, regions of the country, socio-economic influences, and the list could go on and on. The point is that the nonverbal messages you are trying to figure out may be connected to a cultural context. The third guideline to help you decode nonverbal messages is to consider the multitude of factors that influence messages. Someone might be feeling ill and their nonverbal indicators are out of whack. They might just have received some bad news and they're trying to keep it together. Or the person you're talking to has conflicting feelings that actually has nothing to do with you. There are so many reasons someone's nonverbal communication might be hard to interpret. The best path is the path of not jumping to conclusion and to continue to attempt to figure it out and ask questions if that's appropriate to the moment. Let's transition now to guidelines for nonverbal messages that you are sending. There are 3 quick guidelines we should remember. The first guideline to sending nonverbal messages is to be consistent. Your nonverbal message should be consistent with the verbal message you are trying to communicate. Don't make it harder for people to understand you. Don't try to make your partner or coworker or boss have to guess. They might be thinking, she's saying this, but I'm noticing this about her nonverbals. I wonder what that means. The second guideline in sending nonverbal messages is to monitor your messages. Others are going to pick up on and be aware of what you are doing nonverbally. In fact, they might listen more to your nonverbal messages than your verbal messages. Think about what your nonverbal messages are saying. Monitor those messages. The third guideline in sending nonverbal messages is to think about what is socially appropriate. For North American cultures, for instance, eye contact is important, but this is not true of all cultures. Touching others is something that should always be approached cautiously, as this can also be very easily misinterpreted. Consider the culture and societal norms for all of your nonverbal behavior. If you want to be interpreted correctly, stay inside of these norms. Here is the final exam question. What does the open palm sign mean in Greece? See page 145 for your answer. Is there any other type of messages that can be as misinterpreted as nonverbal messages? We need to be cautious in interpreting others' nonverbal messages and aware of the type of nonverbal messages we might be sending. I would wave goodbye now, but I'm just not sure how that might be interpreted. I'll see you in the next video.